Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Mrs. Eleanor Hawkins pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as the autumn wind rattled the windows of her Victorian boarding house. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, marking the afternoon hour with solemn precision. She glanced up at the ceiling, listening intently for any sound from the apartment above. Silence, always silence, yet somehow the silence from upstairs felt different than mere emptiness. It felt expectant, watching, a silence that pressed against her eardrums like a physical force. It had been 3 weeks since Mr. James Bennett had rented the upstairs apartment, the same one he and his wife had occupied years ago, before the tragedy. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to carry a permanent shadow of melancholy. Eleanor had noticed how his hands trembled slightly when he signed the lease, how his gaze would drift to the ceiling, as if seeing through it to the rooms above. "My wife and I would like to take the upstairs apartment," he had said that day, standing on her doorstep with a single suitcase. No furniture, no boxes of belongings, just one weathered leather suitcase with peeling corners and tarnished brass fixtures. Eleanor had been pleased to have the apartment occupied again after months of vacancy. The previous tenants had left in the middle of the night without explanation, forfeiting their security deposit. Before them, a young couple had stayed only 2 weeks before claiming the place felt wrong. Eleanor had dismissed their complaints as the superstitious nonsense of city folk, unused to the creaks and groans of an old house. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. When will Mrs. Bennett be arriving?" she had asked, noticing how he flinched almost imperceptibly at the question. "Oh, she's just finalizing some arrangements," he had replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "She'll be joining me by the end of the week." That night, Eleanor had been woken by the sound of footsteps pacing the floor above her bedroom, back and forth, with a rhythm too measured to be natural, too deliberate. When she had mentioned it to James the next morning, he had looked startled, then quickly composed himself. "I'm sorry to have disturbed you," he had said. "I suffer from insomnia. I'll be more mindful." But Eleanor could have sworn the footsteps she had heard were lighter than his, a woman's tread. That had been 3 weeks ago. Eleanor had never seen Mrs. Bennett, never caught the sound of a woman's laughter or the murmur of conversation between husband and wife. Yet sometimes in the dead of night, she would wake to the sound of what seemed like sobbing from above, a low, mournful keening that made her blood run cold. When she brought up the fresh linens, James always met her at the door, never allowing her to step inside. "Margaret is resting," he would say with a gentle smile that didn't match the haunted look in his eyes. Or, "She's just stepped out for a bit of fresh air." But Eleanor had been watching the building. No woman ever entered or left. Every excuse was plausible, yet Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Twice now, she had noticed strange water stains forming on her bedroom ceiling, dark, spreading blotches that appeared overnight and dried by morning, leaving no trace. The plumber found no leaks. Then there were the whispers. Standing in the hallway outside the upstairs apartment, Eleanor would sometimes hear a woman's voice, so faint she could never make out the words, but unmistakably feminine. When she pressed her ear to the door, the whispers would stop abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. Most disturbing of all were the dreams. Since James Bennett had moved in, Eleanor had begun dreaming of a dark-haired woman standing at the foot of her bed, her face obscured by shadows, water dripping from her sodden nightgown onto the floorboards. In the dreams, the woman would slowly raise her arm, pointing toward the ceiling with a pale finger. Her lips would move, but no sound would come out. Eleanor would always wake gasping, her sheets damp with sweat. Today, she decided she would discover the truth. She had prepared a basket of freshly baked scones and tea, a welcome gift for the elusive Mrs. Bennett that could no longer be politely refused. She had also slipped a small silver cross inside her pocket, though she wasn't entirely sure why she felt she needed it. As she climbed the stairs, she noticed for the first time how the temperature seemed to drop with each step, until her breath fogged faintly in the air when she reached the landing. The walls of the narrow hallway seemed to press inward, and Eleanor had the distinct impression that the house itself was holding its breath. Eleanor climbed the stairs slowly, her knees protesting with each step. The wooden staircase creaked beneath her weight, announcing her approach. An odd sensation crawled up her spine, the feeling of being watched from above. When she glanced up, she thought she saw a flicker of movement at the top of the stairs, but when she blinked, nothing was there. When she reached the landing, she paused to catch her breath and straighten her dress before knocking on the door. 3 sharp raps, then silence. The silence was absolute, unnatural. No shuffling of feet, no creak of floorboards. It was as if the entire apartment had been swallowed by a void. "Mr. Bennett," she called out, her voice sounding thin and reedy in the heavy air. "I've brought some afternoon tea for you and Mrs. Bennett." No response came from within the apartment. Eleanor frowned, certain she had seen James return from his morning walk earlier. She knocked again, louder this time. The sound seemed to die as soon as it was made, absorbed by the dense wood. "Mr. Bennett? Are you there?" As she raised her hand to knock a 3rd time, Eleanor noticed something dark seeping from beneath the door. A thin trickle of liquid, black in the shadowy hallway. She bent closer, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. It looked like water, but with a strange viscosity that made it crawl rather than flow across the wooden floor. She jumped back as the door suddenly swung open on its own, revealing James Bennett standing several feet away from the threshold. He wore a rumpled shirt, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Behind him, the apartment was shrouded in an unnatural darkness, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. "Mrs. Hawkins?" he said, his voice strained. His eyes darted nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone standing behind her. "This isn't a good time." Eleanor noticed with growing unease that his bare feet were wet, leaving dark footprints on the hardwood floor. She glanced down at the threshold, but the strange liquid she'd seen moments ago had vanished. Eleanor stood her ground, though her instincts screamed at her to turn and flee. "I've brought tea for you and your wife, Mr. Bennett." Her voice quavered slightly. "I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Bennett yet, And I thought, Margaret isn't feeling well today." He interrupted, not taking the basket she offered. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. Had he always looked so gaunt? "Perhaps another time." Eleanor noticed how his hands trembled violently as he gripped the doorframe, knuckles white with strain. Behind him, she could see into the apartment, impeccably tidy, with 2 teacups set on the table by the window. One appeared untouched. A woman's shawl was draped over one of the chairs, and Eleanor could have sworn it hadn't been there a moment ago. "I understand," she said carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady. "But surely a cup of tea might help her feel better. I won't stay long." The lights in the apartment flickered briefly, though the electricity in the rest of the building remained steady. A cold draft swept past Eleanor, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of wet earth and decay. James' expression hardened, his eyes suddenly alert and watchful. "That won't be necessary." From somewhere deep within the apartment came a soft thud, like something heavy falling to the floor. James flinched, glancing over his shoulder into the darkness. "Mr. Bennett," Eleanor said, summoning her courage despite the cold dread settling in her stomach. "I must insist on meeting your wife. I've been very patient, but as the landlady of this establishment, I have certain responsibilities." A shadow passed across the wall behind James, too tall and distorted to be his. The temperature in the hallway plummeted further. A look of raw pain crossed his face. "Please, Mrs. Hawkins, not today." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's not herself today." "Then when?" Eleanor demanded, her patience finally wearing thin despite her growing fear. "It's been 3 weeks, and I haven't heard a single sound from this apartment except for your footsteps. Not a word spoken, not a laugh, not even the sound of water running in the sink. I'm beginning to wonder if Mrs. Bennett exists at all." The moment the words left her mouth, a low, gurgling moan emanated from the darkened bedroom, causing Eleanor to take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't a human sound. It was too hollow, too wet. James seemed to deflate before her eyes, his shoulders sagging as he leaned against the doorframe. Something changed in his expression, the careful mask of normalcy slipping to reveal something desperate and terrified underneath. "She's here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She's always here. She never leaves." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine, raising goosebumps on her arms. "May I come in, Mr. Bennett?" The words came out almost against her will. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. "She won't like it," he murmured. "But perhaps you can help." The apartment was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, as if no one actually lived there. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the dining room table next to 2 place settings. A woman's robe hung on a hook by the bathroom door, dripping water onto the floor, though there was no evidence it had been recently used. A pair of delicate reading glasses rested on an open book by the armchair, the pages damp and curling. The air inside the apartment was thick and heavy, difficult to breathe. It smelled of mildew and something else, something Eleanor couldn't quite identify, but that made her stomach churn. Stains marked the ceiling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, but there was no sign of Mrs. Bennett. "Where is your wife?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She clutched her basket tighter, the silver cross in her pocket suddenly feeling very small and inadequate. James moved to the window, gazing out at the autumn leaves swirling in the garden below. The glass was foggy, as if someone had been breathing on it from the inside. Slowly, deliberately, he drew the curtains closed, plunging the room into gloom. The only light now came from a single lamp in the corner, which cast long, distorted shadows across the walls. "Margaret died 5 years ago," he said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. "Right here in this apartment." Eleanor clutched the back of a chair for support. "But you told me—" "I know what I told you," James interrupted, turning to face her with eyes that now seemed hollow, almost black in the dim light. "And it wasn't a lie. Not entirely." Something scurried across the floor at the edge of Eleanor's vision, something small and dark that disappeared beneath the sofa before she could get a proper look. The floorboards beneath her feet felt damp. James guided Eleanor to the corner of the room, where a small table held a framed photograph. The glass was cracked, the image beneath water damaged and faded. Still, Eleanor could make out a beautiful young woman with dark hair and what might once have been a gentle smile. Now, in the shadowy light, her expression seemed almost sinister. "She didn't die of an illness, did she, Mr. Bennett?" Eleanor asked, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. James's hand trembled as he touched the photograph. "There was an accident," he whispered. "The bathtub. I only left her alone for a few minutes. The doctor said she must have fallen, hit her head, drowned. After she died, I couldn't bear to stay. I traveled, tried to outrun the grief, but nothing worked." He looked around the apartment, his expression haunted. "So I came back to where we were happiest." He ran his fingers along the cracked frame. "And when I returned, I found her waiting for me." The bathroom door creaked open slightly on its own, releasing a waft of damp, musty air. Eleanor could hear water dripping steadily from a faucet. "Mr. Bennett," Eleanor said gently, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "Your wife is gone." "No," he insisted, his voice rising with a manic edge. "She's here. She won't let me forget, won't let me sleep, won't let me leave." He gestured wildly at the apartment. "I can feel her presence, watching me, always watching. Sometimes, when I'm between waking and sleeping, I can see her standing over me, water streaming from her hair, her nightgown plastered to her body. I set out her teacup every morning because she punishes me if I don't. I hang her robe just as she liked it. I keep fresh flowers because they were her favorite." "Punishes you?" Eleanor echoed, her mouth dry with fear. James rolled up his sleeve, revealing deep purple bruises on his arm, bruises in the distinct shape of fingerprints. "She drags me from my bed," he whispered, "tries to pull me into the bathtub. She wants company, you see. She's so lonely." Eleanor felt a mixture of pity and terror for this broken man. "James," she said softly, using his first name. This can't be real. You need help. You need to accept that Margaret is gone." "You don't understand," he said, moving to the center of the room, his eyes fixed on something over Eleanor's shoulder. "She's angry now. You've upset her." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret!" The air in the apartment suddenly felt heavier, colder, pressing against Eleanor's lungs like a physical weight. The lamp flickered and dimmed. Eleanor watched in growing horror as James spoke to the empty air. "Margaret, darling, it's just Mrs. Hawkins. You remember I told you about her. She's been very kind to us. Please don't hurt her." All the moisture seemed to have left Eleanor's mouth. "Mr. Bennett," "There's no one." Her words died in her throat as a sound caught her attention, the soft, wet rustle of sodden fabric dragging against the floor from the bedroom. It was accompanied by a faint sloshing noise, like footsteps in standing water, though the floor was now dry. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice cracking. James's face lit up with a mixture of relief and dread. "You heard her? You really heard her?" He backed away from the bedroom door. "She usually only comes out at night." Before Eleanor could respond, the bedroom door creaked open wider. No one emerged, but the temperature plummeted further, their breath now clearly visible in the frigid air. A puddle of dark water began spreading from the doorway, inching across the floor toward Eleanor's feet. The scent that wafted into the room wasn't lavender. It was the unmistakable stench of stagnant water and decay, like a body long submerged. "Margaret always loved lavender water," James said, his voice strained, as if trying to convince himself as much as Eleanor. "Don't you smell it? She's welcoming you." The floorboards groaned under an invisible weight. Wet footprints appeared in the puddle of water, advancing slowly toward them, small, bare feet that left dark impressions on the wood. "She wants to meet you," James whispered, his face ashen. "She gets so lonely when I'm gone, so angry. I think that's why the others left." The lights flickered again, more violently this time, and in the momentary darkness, Eleanor thought she glimpsed a figure standing in the bedroom doorway. A woman in a white nightgown, her long, dark hair plastered to her skull, her skin bloated and pale with a bluish tinge. Water streamed from her clothes, her hair, her fingertips, pulling at her feet. When the light stabilized, the doorway was empty again, but the wet footprints had advanced another step. Eleanor felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as primal terror gripped her. "I should go," she said, backing toward the door, the tea basket forgotten on the table. "I've intruded enough." Her foot splashed in a puddle that hadn't been there moments ago. The water was ice cold and oddly viscous. "Please don't," James pleaded, a note of panic in his voice. "Not now, not when she's finally letting someone else know she's here. It's been so lonely being the only one who knows." His eyes darted frantically between Eleanor and the advancing footprints. "Besides, she won't let you leave now that she knows you can see her." As if to confirm his words, the front door suddenly slammed shut on its own. The lock turned with a definitive click. Eleanor glanced toward the bedroom door, which now stood halfway open. The darkness beyond seemed absolute, unnatural, a void rather than merely an unlit room. The wet footprints stopped just a few feet away from her, as if their owner was standing there, invisible yet present. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, her voice shaking. "I don't know what's happening here, but I think you should speak with someone. A doctor, perhaps. And I need to leave, now." She fumbled in her pocket for the silver cross. James's expression darkened. "You think I'm mad?" His laugh was hollow, edged with hysteria. "I thought so too at first. Kept telling myself it was grief, imagination, until she touched me." "I think you're grieving," Eleanor corrected, trying to edge around the invisible presence to reach the door. "And grief can play tricks on the mind." "It's not a trick," he insisted, his voice rising. "Margaret, please. Show her you're real. Show her what you show me every night." The temperature dropped so severely that Eleanor's breath formed crystalline clouds in the air, The puddle at her feet began to freeze, crackling as it spread further across the floor. The bedroom door swung open fully with a violent bang. Beyond it lay the bedroom, but Eleanor could see a bathroom through a doorway on the far side. The clawfoot bathtub visible and filled to the brim with dark water, which sloshed gently against the side, as if disturbed by some unseen movement beneath the surface. Standing between Eleanor and the bedroom was a figure that hadn't been there a second ago. A woman in a nightgown that might once have been white, but was now stained a murky gray-green. Her back was to them, her long dark hair hanging in wet ropes down to her waist, water pooling around her bare feet. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle. James whimpered, pressing himself against the wall. "She's here," he whispered. "Do you see her now?" Slowly, with jerky, unnatural movements, the figure began to turn. "Don't look at her face," James suddenly screamed. "For God's sake, don't look at her face." Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't tear her eyes away as the woman's head rotated further than humanly possible. Her waterlogged face came into view, bloated, the skin sloughing off in places to reveal the darkness beneath. Her eyes were cloudy and bulging, fixed in a terrible stare. Her blue-tinged lips drew back in what might have been a smile, revealing blackened teeth and a swollen tongue. Water streamed continuously from her mouth as she opened it wider than any human mouth should open, her jaw dislocating with a sickening crack. Eleanor backed away until she hit the door, her hand frantically searching for the knob. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." With desperate strength, born of terror, Eleanor ripped her arm free and fumbled with the door handle, yanking it open. Behind her, James shouted something unintelligible, his voice drowned out by a deafening roar like a burst dam. Water began pouring from the walls, the ceiling, bubbling up between the floorboards. Eleanor staggered into the hallway, slamming the door behind her. She could hear James screaming on the other side, the sound quickly cut off by a gurgling splash. Water began seeping beneath the door, dark and foul-smelling. She nearly fell down the stairs in her haste, her wet shoes slipping on the wooden steps. Behind her, she heard the door creak open, hinges protesting against the pressure of the water now flowing freely from the apartment. Reaching the bottom landing, Eleanor turned back to see a torrent of black water cascading down the stairs. At the top of the staircase stood the spectral woman, her bloated face now twisted in rage, water streaming from her gaping mouth like a macabre fountain. In her grotesquely elongated arms, she clutched James Bennett's limp form, his head lolling at an unnatural angle, face blue, and eyes bulging in death. "Margaret?" Eleanor whispered, the name escaping her lips unbidden. The ghost's dead eyes locked onto hers. The apparition's smile, a terrible knowing grin, that split her face almost in half, before retreating back into the darkness of the upstairs hallway, dragging James's body with her. With a final surge, the water rushed down the stairs, and Eleanor fled through the front door into the gathering dusk. She ran back to her own quarters, locking herself inside with trembling hands. She secured each bolt, then collapsed into her armchair, pulling a blanket around her shoulders, despite the warmth of the fire. As the night progressed, Eleanor noticed a dark stain forming on her ceiling, spreading outward like an ink blot. She watched in horror as water began to seep through, first in drops, then in steady streams. The wooden beams groaned under increasing pressure. Suddenly, With a deafening crack, the ceiling collapsed. Among the debris and gushing water, something fell into her living room. A woman's body, bloated and partially decomposed, wearing a white nightgown. Eleanor stared at Margaret Bennett's face, preserved yet distorted by water damage. The woman's hair hung in wet ropes, her skin bloated with a bluish tinge, just as Eleanor had seen in her vision upstairs. The next day, police investigators arrived to take her statement. They told her that James Bennett's body had been discovered in the river 5 years ago, shortly after his wife went missing. They revealed that Margaret's disappearance had been treated as a potential homicide, but without a body, the case had gone cold. Until now, the detective said grimly, looking at the broken ceiling where Margaret's remains had been concealed all these years. Eleanor now understood the truth, that James had murdered his wife, hidden her body in the space between floors, and then taken his own life, consumed by guilt. Yet somehow, both of their spirits remained trapped in the house, doomed to reenact their tragedy. Eleanor Hawkins never rented the upstairs apartment again. She had the door sealed up, the staircase blocked off, but sometimes, late at night, she would still hear footsteps on the upstairs floor, a man's heavy tread, followed by a woman's lighter step, and sometimes the patter of what sounds like water dripping from soaked clothing onto hardwood floors. Those who have stayed in the boarding house long enough know not to investigate these sounds. They know to keep their doors locked at night, to never answer if they hear knocking after dark. And they know, above all else, never to ask about the couple who sometimes appear in the hallway mirror. A gaunt man with hollow eyes, and behind him, a woman with long dark hair and a gentle smile that never quite reaches her eyes. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's Crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carman's Crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.